Hey everyone, thanks for tuning in. If you're new here, consider subscribing. It really helps keep these stories coming. And while you're here, let me know in the comments where you're listening from. Now, sit back, relax, and let's get into the story. I did not go into the Atlas F silo as a leader. I went down as a mechanical engineer who liked to crawl around old machinery on long weekends and talk about it into a handheld recorder. The site sat on a patch of private land outside Roswell, New Mexico. A wind-bent sign along a caliche road warned about abandoned structures and open shafts. One look at the concrete domes and corroded ventilation stacks told me the place had not been maintained for decades. We had permission from the owner to document it, and that was all we needed. I was there with 3 people I trusted: Kira Owens, who could make broken radios talk; Miguel Torres, who could weld, rig, and fix nearly anything that burned fuel; and Dr. Leah Kim, a microbiologist who had offered to join to document any hazards and take the surface samples for her own research notes. The access door weighed as much as a car. Its hinges groaned when I spun the wheel and forced the latch to move. We climbed to the first landing, stood under a concrete arch decayed by water, and checked air with Leah's handheld meter. Oxygen sat at 20.2%. Carbon monoxide was 0. Carbon dioxide read slightly elevated for stale air, but safe enough for entry. I pulled the generator cart to the edge of the hatch, an 8-kilowatt inverter unit I kept clean and ready, and fed a line down to the staging deck 40 feet below ground. Our rope ladder creaked under Miguel's weight as he clipped down with a safety line and called up that the landing was clear. I followed with the generator. We staged it near an old conduit bundle, ran power through a grounded splitter, and brought light to the first length of corridor. Rusted handrails caught the glow and tossed it down a hallway painted in old greens and tans. Every door stenciled with functional names: launch control, crew quarters, power distribution. We walked slow, documented, photographed, and kept a steady pace on radio checks that worked down here only within line of sight. We were not down an hour when Kira leaned on the blast door into the elevator shaft and said she could feel air movement. She was right. Something was breathing through this place even after decades of closure. The shaft doors leaked. The old ventilation duct had not fully sealed. I circled back to the generator and did what we always did: found the original feed into the emergency bus and tested it with a multimeter. Voltage drop was ugly, but we had continuity on a branch that led to the corridor fixtures. I closed a breaker, and the fixtures tried to come to life. Some tubes flickered, some died. Enough stayed lit that we saved gasoline and shut down our unit. As red emergency bulbs warmed up, slow and dull, the corridor took on that submarine look I had seen in photos. No windows, no sky, just steel, concrete, and air that smelled like oil and paint and old water. Chaos above began as a rumor through our phones. A push alert appeared on Kira's lock screen. Public safety notice. Unverified reports of violence in cities within the region. Stay indoors, avoid large gatherings. The messages multiplied. Our signals were weak at best under this much concrete. We tried to load news video and saw only a few frames at a time. Then nothing new, then no signal at all. Within 2 hours, the alerts stopped entirely. Calls would not complete. Texts queued and hung on sending. It was strange enough that we went to the access hatch to back out and make contact from the surface. When Miguel and I spun the hatch wheel, it would not move. The wheel had play. The bars did not retract. He put his shoulder into it. I pulled on a pry bar. We worked the wheel until my hands shook and my shoulders burned. The wheel did not move. Dust fell from the hinge. Small stones clicked across the steel. That was the first time I knew with certainty we were trapped. Something heavy had shifted above. The The weight had jammed the door. I have never liked being sealed in a room, but I know how to make one safe. Our path was clear: stabilize the place, control the two things that kill fast, bad air and bad water, and the one that kills a little slower, cold and heat. Then get a line out. We took inventory. In the old power room, we found a rust-spotted diesel tank with several hundred gallons left. The level gauge was frozen, but a stick down the inspection port came up wet at my mark 40 inches. That put us around 400 gallons remaining. We traced the fuel line to a generator head the size of a small car. It was a classic two-bearing alternator mated to inline diesel with a mechanical governor. McGill checked the oil, replaced the filter with one from a sealed crate, bled the injector lines, and cracked it over by hand to feel compression. We touched a battery pack to the starter, and the engine turned without grinding. I opened the fuel line, bled air from the pump, and set the governor to no load. When Miguel pressed the starter again, the engine caught, coughed, and then settled into a workman's idle. The sound went everywhere. Steel carried it. Concrete held it. It felt wrong to hear a machine wake up down here after so long. It also felt like life. With that head running at a conservative load, we could run lights, ventilation, and tools while burning between 1.5 to 2 gallons per hour, depending on the load. I ran the math on a pad and did not say it out loud. At 2 gallons per hour, this tank would not get us a month if we kept everything bright. We needed air management. The original designers solved this with intake, filtration, and a set of scrubbers sized for a crew larger than ours. Much was stripped, some remained. In a line of sealed crates stacked like coffins, we found lime cartridges that looked like big canisters with granular material inside. Soda lime, a mixture that binds carbon dioxide. The label said, "For emergency use. Replace as indicated by color change." I cracked one and sniffed and felt the dust scratch the back of my throat. Leah took out her air monitor, watched carbon dioxide at 800 parts per million, and reminded us she wanted us below 1,000 when sleeping and under 2,000 when we worked hard. That was acceptable. Above 2,000, headaches and fatigue would set in. Above 5,000, thinking gets slow. Above 10,000, the body handles it poorly. We installed 2 scrubber canisters in series in the recirculation path and kept fans running low. I tied the monitor to a column and set it to chirp if levels rose above our limit. Water was our next problem. The site had access to an aquifer through an old well. The original pump was long gone, but the wellhead remained, blind flanged and bolted shut. The missile had once needed water for cooling and fire suppression. We loosened the flange and smelled clean rock. I improvised a drop pipe out of stainless tubing and a foot valve I found in a bin. Miguel welded a bracket to hold a small submersible pump we brought for sump duty. We lowered it 50 feet on braided line. When we powered it, water rose up the clear hose in a smooth column and discharged into a cleaned storage tank that used to hold demineralized water. Leah added a small quantity of chlorine bleach by volume and let it to contact for an hour. Later, we'd run the water through carbon filters to remove taste. Tests came back clean for coliform and nitrates. That was luck and geology. Food ran out fast if we thought in days and not weeks. The emergency lockers held some military rations well past shelf life. Many were spoiled. I opened one and found the heater pads intact and a main course that had broken down into a sour paste. We kept only what gave acceptable readings and what smelled normal. My own supplies were meant for a weekend, not a month. 2 camping stoves, fuel canisters, rice, dried beans, nuts, a few canned soups, a bucket of oats. Kira had instant coffee and freeze-dried fruit and nothing heavy. Miguel had venison jerky he made himself and would not admit how much he brought. Leah had protein bars and sealed snacks for a road trip that never happened. We rationed and then went further. We built a growing system because we had to. The old control room had wall space, constant temperature, and power. I found plastic trays in storage and lined them with washed gravel. We used shop lights with full-spectrum fluorescent tubes and hung them on chains so we could adjust height as sprouts grew. Leah sprouted legumes and leafy greens. We built racks for microgreens, with drain trays and a small pump for recirculation. It was not enough for calories, but it was vitamins, and the taste of something fresh inside a place with no sky changed mood as much as health. At night, when I lay on a cot under the noise of the ventilation, I thought about the mass above our heads. Concrete, soil, a heavy access door that had shifted off its carrier track. I learned to measure time by machine cycles and not by sunlight. Morning became generator preheat, oil check, filter check, fuel math scribbled on a clipboard. Afternoon was water testing, light cycle checks, and a detailed pass through the air returns to vacuum dust and inspect for mold. Our carbon dioxide monitor became our clock. When numbers crept up, we switched scrubber canisters. When the indicator color changed, we marked the time, weighed the canister, and logged consumption, then recharged it with fresh media. Leah sterilized surfaces with a dilute bleach solution and pointed out spots where condensation could feed something we did not want. We set up a second instrument to track relative humidity. We set a target around 50%. Below that, our sinuses rebelled in the dry air. Above that, the walls would grow things. Kira worked the radios. She opened the old panel, found a wire harness that still had structure, and soldered in jumpers to a shortwave set I used in the desert. She ran a coaxial line up the elevator shaft to an improvised antenna that she raised as high as she could below the jam in the hatch. She grounded the rig to an earth point and tuned slowly across bands. We heard only noise for days. When she did receive something, it was a voice that repeated call signs and code phrases and location names in a tight loop. The phrase Strategic Containment Zone Echo lived in the middle of one of those transmissions. It came and went with ionospheric mood. The timing matched night here. We recorded and played it back and concluded it was automated. No two-way contact. No authenticity marker we could confirm. It was either real and far away or recorded long ago and now bouncing. It meant little in practical terms, but it changed how we felt. We were not alone in the world. Something out there still spoke, even if we could not reach it. 3 weeks in, I learned to ignore the low knocks and creaks that came with settling steel. The silo shifted when temperatures changed. Air currents thumped in ducts. Small metal sounds traveled in odd ways. We installed simple motion detectors at the ends of the lower tunnels simply because we liked early warnings for anything that moved. The first time they tripped, it happened at 3 a.m. The alarm was a gentle tone. I thought it was a test pattern in my dream. When the sound hit my brain all at once with the rest of me awake, I sat up without speaking. Kira came into the control room already lacing boots. Miguel clamped his welding mask to a belt and took a long pry bar. Leah grabbed her kit bag like she meant to reach it before she reached for shoes. No one made a joke about rats. No one said it was probably a loose wire. We knew the wires. We had run them ourselves. We looked at the small grayscale camera feed on the monitor. The exhaust shaft camera showed nothing but a slow, soft movement of air and dust. The motion log said a shape had crossed the frame high and right. That was odd. High and right meant near the mesh where the shaft turned to a small section we believed was sealed long ago. We went down slow. We wore gloves and masks with P100 filters so that we did not pull anything from dust into our lungs. The air on the lower level felt cooler and wetter. I checked the meter. Carbon dioxide sat acceptable. Oxygen was fine. Relative humidity was up 6 points from our target. The floor gritted under my boots. The smell was different. It had a stale note like old cardboard left in a damp garage. Our lights picked up filament webs, dust curtains, and patches of black on the wall that looked like soot but spread like a living thing when I looked closer. Leah leaned in, swabbed a corner into a vial, and did not speak for a moment. She said we would talk after we checked the shaft. She did not want us leaning against walls if we could help it. We moved along the handrail. We reached the exhaust shaft doors and found fresh scratches on the paint near the bottom hinge. You do not get paint scratches in a sealed place unless something with grit on it moves against the door. We opened the viewport. Something thin and fibrous hung from the opposite side like a torn cloth strip. Kira slid the camera through and down. Dust swarmed. The light caught a space beyond the bend in the duct that looked dry and then went dark again. We caught one clean frame of something man-made, an old stenciled warning in Cyrillic, faded but legible enough that Leah read each letter slowly and then said there was no doubt. It was an old biohazard label from late Cold War stock. That did not make sense in an American missile site unless you understood how messy those final years were with training samples and captured supplies and joint work that did not get logged where the public would ever see it. By the 4th week, the silo had the rhythm of a vessel at sea. Every day brought small fixes. The generator's exhaust gasket leaked and needed a new ring. We scavenged one from a crate labeled with part numbers no one had cataloged in decades. Kira's antenna mast slipped 2 meters when the cord stretched under heat and then snapped and stuck between 2 beams. We pulled it up inch by inch with a come-along and then tied off a secondary line. The hydroponic trays grew fast and then failed in one corner with a brown slime that Leah cut out and treated with peroxide. The wind above ground shifted, pressing heavy air into our intake on some days and pulling on it the next. We learned to predict that by barometer. I hung a mechanical gauge because I like needles I can see and not numbers on a screen when it matters. The first illness came in slow. Miguel started with a cough that he blamed on the welder's smoke. The cough stayed when he stopped welding for 3 days. It came with a low fever. Leah took swabs from his throat, looked under the microscope we had powered from a small inverter, and frowned without saying words. She had seen this kind of growth in damp basements, a fungus emerging from dormancy. She had tools for small infections and none for systemic attacks. We could not introduce any drug heavy without knowing how it would interact with the rest of him. We took it like we handled machinery, reduced the load, fixed the environment. We pulled humidity down 10 points. We swapped every filter in the scrubbers early and upped air changes per hour while watching carbon dioxide so we did not poison ourselves by accident. Leah isolated Miguel in a dry room with comfort and clean air and food he would accept. The cough backed off in 3 days. The fever broke. He did not admit he had been worried, but I saw the relief when he heard the meter beep a normal reading. The second motion alarm did not come with a camera frame. It came with a sound we had not heard before. It was slow and regular and came up the shaft like someone tapping a pipe from far away. We all froze and listened. I counted to a minute. It tapped again. It was not code I recognized. It was not random. We knew the infected had reached rural areas above us because the rare snippets of radio traffic Kira caught mentioned roadblocks and protected corridors, and then grew quiet. We had seen no one at our hatch, and we had tried to signal through the small gaps with hammer blows and shouted words. The tapping did not answer us when we tried to call back. It kept time with nothing. Miguel watched the hatch while I took the long way around to confirm no changes in pressure or airflow on the lower levels. I put my hand near the welded plate on a secondary door we had never planned to open. It felt cold and slightly vibrating. That meant air moved behind it. It had not felt like that a week ago. I cut that night into tasks because tasks are simple. We reinforced 2 bulkheads with steel plate pulled from spare scaffold decking. Miguel welded 4 braces across the door that faced the exhaust shaft. He burned clean beads because his hands never shook. We raised a barricade in the long corridor using maintenance racks bolted to the floor. It would not stop someone determined, but it would slow anything that did not think around obstacles. We strung a line with small bells on it high and low on the approaches. I do not like improvised alarms, but I like silence even less. We kept the lights low because light draws attention. The generator carried the load well at night with the grow lights off and only emergency fixtures on. Our diesel burn rate dropped below 1 gallon per hour at this reduced load. I marked that on clipboard and calculated fuel life again. If we kept this schedule and had no failures, we could make it 80 to 90 days before we ran dry. Our air supply would outlast fuel if we could keep scrubbers charged. Water would outlast both. Food would not. When the breach came, it started with 1 vent cover clattering down onto the deck 2 levels above the launch chamber. We heard it through the hatch. It sounded like a dropped pan in a quiet house. We moved fast and ready. Leah stayed in the control room with the door locked and the radio on. Kira stood with a flashlight in a pry bar because she had never once in her life stood back when it mattered. Miguel and I took positions on either side of the long corridor to the chamber. The first figure emerged from the far end in slow, irregular motion. I will not describe details beyond what matters for safety. Clothes were torn. Skin was not healthy. There was coordinated movement in the way a person moves when something else has priority over caution. The figure moved toward sound and heat and light. It did not respond to voice. It did not display fear. That is enough for a plan. We fell back behind the barricade, made noise at our chosen time, and let the person that no longer behaved like a person come through into a space we had chosen because it limited directions. 2 more followed. Their steps were uncertain but constant. We made sure none reached us while we moved. We baited them into the launch chamber where the great doors above still had mechanical functions. The cables and counterweights were intact. The motors were not. We had practiced with hand cranks and block and tackle gear because that is what you do in a site where the original power distribution is not trustworthy. The chamber was a mile of steel surfaces and straight lines. The shape of it mattered. Sound collected here. We took advantage of it. I gave a signal and we stepped behind the last barricade. Miguel cranked on the first handle we had prepared and put his weight into every turn. The door sections above us began to move. The gap at the top widened enough to allow a draft. The creatures in the chamber oriented to that new source of air and sound and light from above. We backed further into a side alcove and closed a gate we had hinged there for this purpose. When the doors above reached our mark, I fixed the hand cranks with pins, and we moved to the valve wheels on the venting duct. The designers had built a way to purge smoke from this chamber in case of fire. It would not act fast, but it would lower oxygen content over time if we ran it long with the intake closed. We shut the intake louver, opened the exhaust line we had checked and rebuilt, and let the fan slowly pull air out. Leah called readings from the control room as the oxygen level in the chamber dropped. At 19%, a healthy person begins to feel it. At 17, breathing is noticeable work. At 16, fatigue comes quickly. We did not aim lower than that. We do not harm for the sake of harm. We aim to create conditions under which the threat could no longer function at speed and coordination. Minutes became longer when you listened to a fan pull air and felt nothing for a while. The creatures inside slowed and then lay down and stopped moving. We waited with the fans on while Leah ran her own check against the stationary creatures through a small window high on the chamber wall. When the reading stabilized and her voice had a steady tone, we opened a side hatch we could handle safely. We removed the threat without details that do not belong in a safe narration. We closed the hatch and aired the chamber again and returned oxygen to normal levels. That victory cost us. The fans had drawn high current for an hour. The generator load spike showed up on the clipboard as a number we could not ignore. Diesel consumption rose with that load. A gauge does not lie. Our burn rate that hour almost tripled. We had used 4 gallons we did not plan to spend that day. We used 4 more in the cleanup and the resetting of the doors and the walk-down inspection of every duct we could reach. When I added those numbers to our total use to date, I watched our projected fuel horizon fall from 3 months to something like 2.5. That hurt more than anything else we had done that night. It got quieter after the breach because the infected have patterns. Sound draws. When sound stops, they do not hold ground they did not care about. We moved faster. We reinforced every vent cover. We welded tabs across any panel that rattled. We closed doors that did not need to be open and installed small viewports in them so we could observe without opening. We built a second set of motion detectors with redundant power in case one line got cut. We tested every alarm by hand once a day. Kira built a small code for the 4 of us to say location and status without names, just in case anything listened. Leah called me to the microscope room the next day and showed me a slide. On it were structures that looked like hyphae. She said the samples from the lower corridor held a dormant fungal strain with features she did not fully recognize. Decades of isolation had selected for something that liked steel, paint, and dew. Her conclusion was simple: control humidity, control airflow, control human contact with suspect surfaces, and we would be fine. If we did not, we risked infections that would sap energy and cloud thinking and turn small injuries into major ones. We wore gloves when we did not need to before. We wore respirators any time we entered lower zones. We wiped down our boots when we came back to living areas. We turned the lower level into a quarantine area that only got traffic for inspections and nothing else. Kira pulled a voice from the radio a week after the breach. It was another repeating message, but this one had a human cadence and noise like it had been recorded in a hurry. It said a location in clear text and then replaced it with an encoded string. It asked any survivors to move toward a corridor that ran along a set of highway coordinates. It used that phrase again, Strategic Containment Zone Echo, and then asked for a signal code we did not have. We tried to transmit our position and got no reply. It did not matter. We were sealed by a door we could not move and a shaft that would kill a climber in an instant if a foot slipped. We calculated options anyway. We had rope and hooks. We had a device we could use to climb. It would not get us through a door jammed by load we could not characterize. We used our time to make the place tighter for the next breach. I cleaned the generator that afternoon and felt the vibration change under my hand. It was small. It told me a bearing was wearing faster than I expected. We had grease and shims and the willingness to pull the head down. We took it offline for 4 hours that night, ran the small inverter generator for minimum load, and pulled the alternator apart on a bench. The bearing put out dust like a pencil eraser. We were lucky to have a replacement in the bottom of a crate with oil still sealed in the plastic. We pressed the new one in with a vise and straight edge, checked runout, and reassembled. I spun the rotor by hand to feel it free. It was good work, but I could not stop hearing the bearing that would fail next. Machines tell you what they need if you listen. They never promise they will give you time. The second breach did not come from the same direction. It came down the elevator shaft, a route we had not thought active because of the jam near the hatch. The shaft carried sound like a pipe organ. We heard a rattle like metal on concrete, then a sliding motion, then silence. The camera posted on a bracket showed a section of the shaft wall and a slice of the shaft cage. A hand appeared over the frame and then went away. A foot came into view and then vanished. The motion did not match climbing gear or careful movement. It matched a body trying to use purchase wherever it found it. The infected do not tire like a healthy person does from fear of falling. That is their advantage. That is also how they make mistakes. The body that entered our frame fell and hit the cage with a thud that sent dust down like snow. It lay still. We stayed away until we confirmed there were no others. Then we took the safe steps we had established. We used poles to move the body to an area we could control. We wore masks and gloves and kept every tool involved in the process in a separate section after we cleaned them. We logged the action with time and names. We went back to the shaft and built barriers across the inner wall that would turn anything falling into a slide away from the lower levels. We did not take pride in any of it. We treated it like we would treat a damaged structural member. Identify the load path, interrupt it, and reduce risk. Our little garden delivered the first real change in taste on day 42. The trays of greens had enough mass to make a salad for 4. We ate it slowly with salt and a bit of oil. It was not a celebration. It was a reminder that we could make conditions change inside steel if we did the work. That feeling kept us steady when Leah told us her air samples from the sealed Russian-marked section showed traces of a protein marker consistent with old laboratory strains of organisms that had been designed for testing under strict control. That gave a frame for why the infected reached us as quickly as they did after silence above. Noise, heat, and smell had drawn them through ducts long welded. Sections we believed sealed had gaps. Those gaps were enough for a scent, enough for a draft, enough to tell a mind without caution that there was a path into a place with life. The early Cold War had built this site to hold a missile. The late Cold War had used some of its hidden corners for things no one put in the public record. We lived with that in a direct way now. I learned the feel of carbon dioxide building in a room the way a sailor knows a change in wind. Head heaviness, a need to breathe deeper. I never trusted feeling alone. I watched the meter and set alarms at conservative numbers. When the scrubbers hit capacity faster than our logs predicted, we tore them down and repacked them with fresh media and checked every seal. A cork gasket had seated badly. We fixed it and verified with a smoke test. Every fix gave me a minute back on the fuel clock because fans could run slower when scrubbers did their job well. That minute stacked to hours when we did enough of them. One afternoon, Kira and I climbed to the highest safe point in the shaft to check the antenna again. I wore a harness and used a belay. The air had a dry grit that coated my teeth. We reached the mast, checked bolts, and looked up through the narrow slice of space where concrete and steel left a gap under the jammed hatch. Sunlight made a thin white line across the dust. I stared at it longer than I needed to. Then Kira tapped the radio and told me to listen. It was faint. It was the same voice as before, but one word had changed. It said evacuation, followed by a corridor designation that covered state lines and then cut to noise. It did not help us. It did not hurt us. It told us that somewhere above our roof, people still used measured language and broadcast lists and kept systems alive. We made our beacon that night because it felt like the right countermove. We had tried to transmit from inside with little success. We could not lift a long wire higher. We could, however, build a powerful, simple signal on very high frequency that might be picked up by a passing aircraft running search patterns. I pulled a VHF set from my kit and paired it with a band-specific antenna we could fit into the shaft. We wired a tone beacon set to repeat a simple message at intervals with call sign we chose and location in a format that could be decoded later. We used a backup battery bank I had built from tool packs for power and set it to charge whenever the generator ran. The message was simple because simple travels better. Silo Echo 1, survivors below ground, coordinates encrypted. This is Hale. If anyone hears this, bring oxygen tanks. The coordinates being encrypted was my way of saying that if we managed to open the hatch later, we would show ourselves safely and not before. After the beacon went live, I felt a balance return that I had not felt since the hatch jammed. It was not hope, it was control of one more variable. Machines talk to machines without emotion. If the right machine flew above at the right time, it would hear us. If it did not, we would not know or feel it. That is how you live in a sealed place. You measure, you adjust, you record, you eat, you sleep in shifts. You double-check the seal on your mask and the latch on the door. You speak in full sentences and do not let your voice carry panic because panic wastes air. When you sit under a shaft open by inches and see light cut through dust, you do not pretend the world above is the same. You calculate and work so that if you ever stand in that strip of light, you still have the strength to climb. The last generator sputter came on a night when the air in the chamber below was still and the fans ran at their lowest setting. The engine missed and then caught and then missed again. I had heard the sound before in other engines. It was air in the line from a fuel pickup that had found a new level. We still had fuel, but the pickup point had shifted. I cut power to non-essential systems, bled the line, and brought the engine back. It ran smoother for an hour. Then it stumbled again. I ran a hose from a higher outlet on the tank to a separate small pump and fed the engine from a secondary line while we reseated the pickup. The fix held. We would have to tilt the tank soon and wedge it to catch the last gallons as the level fell. I recorded an entry that night, sitting under the shaft where the dust made slow columns in weak light. I spoke to the machine that would keep broadcasting my voice long after I slept. I said my name. I said the names of my friends. I said our condition, our needs, and the one thing that would make the biggest difference if anyone ever reached us. Air cylinders, high pressure, rated for industrial or medical use, with regulators and masks so we could flood the chamber with safe air while we cut and lifted the jam. I said we were healthy and alert and making sound decisions. I said we would come out if it was safe to come out. I did not say what waited in the lower corners of this place, because that did not matter to a person choosing to approach a sealed hatch. All they needed to know was what we needed and what we could offer. A safe, controlled work site, and 4 people who understood how to move steel. We had turned a missile silo into a sealed survival zone. We had made it breathe, drink, and grow food. We had turned its long-dead corridors into routes we knew by feel and timing. We were not free. We were not saved. We had systems. We had a plan for the next hour and the next day. If the beacon reached someone, there would be a knock on steel topside and a voice through the hatch, and then the problem would not be the same. If it did not, we would still have the meters, the scrubbers, the water pump, the radio that called out in measured words, and the clock that counted down diesel by the hour. That is not despair. That is knowledge of the work ahead. We stayed on schedule. We increased checks when the air felt off. We shut down lights a half hour earlier to conserve. We ate the last venison and thanked Miguel with more than words. We harvested another tray of greens and split it equally. We kept our hands off each other's tools except when asked, because order is how you keep safety in a place that cannot tolerate mistakes. We slept in the same order every night with someone always on watch, because watchfulness is a system like any other. When the tapping came again from deep inside the welded section, we did not jump. We looked at one another, picked up the right tools, and checked the gauges one more time. If someone ever plays back the loop of my beacon, they will hear the last line as clearly as the first. This is Hale, Silo Echo 1, survivors below ground. Bring oxygen. I said it every time I keyed the transmitter for manual test. I will say it every day until the fuel runs out or the hatch moves. If a voice ever answers, we will tell them where to place the chains and where to set the jack. We will tell them where the duct is weak and where the plate is strong. We will tell them to keep quiet when they can, and to turn off engines when they do not need them, because sound carries, and we have learned how it draws the wrong things. We will climb up into clean air if the numbers say it is safe, and if the numbers do not, we will not climb. The will to rebuild does not live in speeches. It lives in meters, seals, and a list of steps laid out on a clipboard with boxes checked in order. That is how we are still here. That is how we will remain until a new sound enters this place from above that is not the wind or dust or a machine we own. Until then, the silo holds. We hold. The fans run. The lights cycle. The beacon speaks. Thanks for listening. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like and subscribe. Your support keeps these creepypastas coming. Until next time, stay alert, stay safe, and never ignore the feeling that something is watching.